So, welcome to The Journey. I'm Kevin Polky. I'm the host of The Journey. And Will Cranfield, thank you for joining us today. Crandall, I'm sorry.
You want to start over?
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Well, I had a guest one time that I was calling, his first name was Len, and I was calling him by a famous football player that played for the Kansas City Chiefs and was in the first Super Bowl. And so when we were at one of our events, I was calling him Len Hardy when his actual name was Len Dawson. Or no, the other way around. I was calling him Len Dawson and his actual name was Len Hardy. And then when I told him who I kept on thinking he was like, I'm good with that. So, well, anyways, Will, thank you very much for coming on to The Journey today.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Yeah. So this is just about a conversation about transformation, and I've been trying to invite individuals that I know that have their own interesting story of transformation and in their own journey of life. And I know we've met a few months ago with a particular project that we'll get into. And but I just wanted to have you come on and tell us a little bit about your story. And well, maybe we could start there. We met because you came back to a resurgence of skateboarding.
Right. Yeah.
And used to skateboard as a young person, and then you took a little bit of a break from
a detour, I suppose you could call. Yeah.
And now have kind of come back and utilizing skating and the whole idea of that regarding part of your life. So tell us a little bit about that.
So a few months ago, I'm involved with an organization that uses skateboarding, art, and music to reach out and engage and connect with younger people and give them opportunities to have a safe place to grow up and learn and live. And so out in the Rockford area, I reached out to somebody to put on an event that included art, music, and skateboarding. I reached out to a friend of mine who gave me your name to get involved with the Shatter Our Silence organization, and I reached out, and you jumped on board real quick, which was awesome. But using the kind of, I don't know, alternative lifestyle, unconventional sports, music, skateboarding stuff, and the lessons that can be taught through that are valuable.
Right.
And the people involved in that lifestyle are often still kind of marginalized. Right. So to give them a platform and a place to be is something that I'm really passionate about.
Sure. And I know that you had an event, the first one in Rockford that you were involved with was the first Saturday in January of 2019, and we happened to be there, and you had asked me to not only have a booth but also to speak. And I know that for the hours that we were there, 4 or 5 hours that we were there, it was really well attended. It seemed to go really well during the skating competition, and the art show seemed to be pretty amazing. Quite a few people were there. So, any estimate of how many people were there that day?
So there was one picture that somebody took, and it probably had to be around the height of, I think early evening was when there was the most people there, and I went through and just kind of counted. There was like 250 people in that picture. And then from the beginning when we started, what time did we start? 4 o'clock or
4 o'clock, yeah.
So when we started at 4 until we ended at the end of the night, 11 o'clock, there was, best I could tell, never less than 100 or 100 people there. So throughout the day, 500 people, I would say, maybe, easy.
which is in itself a first time event, downtown Rockford in a warehouse, essentially cold. Yeah, it was, like I said, that first Saturday in January, it was maybe not as cold as it's been the last couple of weeks.
We got lucky that day. It was 45, 50 degrees
during the day. It wasn't too
beautiful.
Bad. Yeah, but a lot of artists that were there, a lot of local artists there, a lot of pretty cool vendors with reaching out with a lot of different things, and the skateboarding there was some pretty good pretty good skaters that were there.
Yeah, I was really thrilled with how that event went. It was it was a really fun day. Okay. Really good time. Good. And the response afterwards has been really enjoyable for me. I've had people reach out and say, I came for the skateboarding, and what was going on with the substance abuse stuff? What was that about? And it's given me an opportunity to help some people, which was really what it was about. Yeah. So to see that happen was, even if it was just a couple people, I felt like it was successful.
So the event was, yes, it had to do with skateboarding, it had to do with art of all types, but specifically, still art, paintings and different things like that. And then it also had music, but it was really about raising awareness about mental health, about depression, about substance abuse, about suicide. And so tell the audience a little bit about how'd you get involved with this becoming something that you wanted to raise some awareness around, and what's a little bit about that story?
Well, I've been personally affected with substance abuse myself.
Okay.
I battled with it for I suppose you could say I'm still battling, but in the depths of active addiction for almost 10 years.
Okay.
And finally, I don't want to say overcoming, but finally getting to the other side of that and getting to a place where a better place where I'm at today. Okay. I am forever grateful for the position that I'm in, and I take every opportunity I can to find places to give back and maybe prevent some other people from going down the road that I went down.
Okay. So you, if I understood what you're saying, so there was a time period where you identified being actively in addiction for 10 years.
Yeah.
Roughly. Now, is that do you consider that when you started, or is that just when you were at the height of the addiction?
The better part of that was, but pretty desperate. Okay. Pretty far down into the depths of addiction.
Okay.
Pretty much from the time of early 20s until almost the end of my 20s, it was things got pretty dicey there.
Okay.
And to have made it out of that is a miracle.
Okay. And you have been sober now for how long?
Coming up on 7 years.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, congratulations. So again, just kind of following where you were going, is that so you had not started using alcohol or drugs until your early 20s?
No. Addiction goes way back.
Okay.
Pretty much the earliest. Some of the earliest memories that I have are rooted with addiction in it. And, I think just stealing liquor from the neighbor's, cabinet, that's 7, 8 years old.
Okay.
And then progressing from there.
Okay. So you differentiate between use and experimenting in use, and what a 7-year-old does, even though that seems pretty young, but having been an addiction counselor for almost 30 years now, that isn't the first time I've heard that. But you define use versus addiction. So what do you mean by addiction? How do you define addiction?
Well, I don't know if I do. I don't know if I was clear on that, or if it was So the definition of the way that I define addiction is there's this thing inside of me, this feeling inside of me that something outside of myself is going to fill that hole.
Sure.
So it could be, early on it was food, it could be drugs, it could be gambling, it could be shopping, all types of things. So there's something inside of me that goes, whatever that is, whatever my obsession is about, is going to make me feel whole inside.
Okay.
And that goes back, way back to when I was a kid.
Okay.
I remember wanting validation from other people early on, and ultimately it stems through the work that I've done in recovery. It goes all the way back to issues that I had with my father.
Okay. And so let me ask that. So mom and dad married, mom and dad divorced. What was the scenario with that? And are you from around here? I didn't even ask that.
So yeah, I grew up in Woodstock, Illinois. It's about 45 minutes east of here.
Okay.
Small little town. Yeah. It was a great place to grow up.
Okay.
My parents were married when I was young. My father struggled with addiction, various forms, and I didn't have a terrible childhood. Things weren't. I've certainly heard worse situations and worse stories, and looking back on it, it's not overly traumatizing. But what I do remember is that my father struggled with addiction, and I just a quick example and a quick story. I remember I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. And my father telling me that he's going to come home after work and spend time with me.
Sure. Yeah.
And I would sit and watch and wait for him to come home. It was the time for him to get off, and about 15 minutes to drive home, and then he wouldn't come home. And I would sit and I would have this feeling of wanting him to be there and feeling abandoned.
Right.
And then we'd have dinner. Finally, my mom, we'd have dinner and put us to bed, and then I'd wake up to my parents arguing at 2 o'clock in the morning when the bars got out, and he'd come home, and my parents would fight, and
sure.
Ultimately, by the time I was 8, my mom was done with that. So they got a divorce, and my father moved away. About 20 minutes away, but I never saw him. He made the decision to continue the destructive, crazy lifestyle that addiction involves, as opposed to being a father.
Sure. Okay. It's interesting when you talked about. I remember when I first started doing addiction work in the early 90s. And listening to addicts when I was running an intensive outpatient group, and trying to understand, when it came to real time of counseling, not necessarily what college was supposed to teach us, and all that, all the training and
textbook stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. But literally listening to their stories, and one of the things that I realized that a common thing that was going on was that there was this, what you used the words, a hole in their soul.
Right.
And it didn't matter if it was weed, it didn't matter if it was alcohol or heroin or cocaine or gambling or sex or relationships. It was that they were looking for something from the outside to fill the hole on the inside.
Right.
And I know in my own life there would be times when I tried to do that in some kind of physical way, either through sports or bodybuilding or whatever it was, or I tried to do it by, if I get one more degree, one more license, this next job, this next promotion, or if it was relational, or I even tried it if I become super, super good and super religious, then that would do it, right? And because there was this guilt all the time, and no matter what, there was this imbalance that happened in each one of those what I refer to quadrants or areas, and because the hole was on the inside, it can't be filled from the outside,
right?
And then when you talked about with your dad, maybe with your parents, both of them, but maybe it wasn't about as much what did happen, it was what didn't happen.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, that idea that he didn't come home, and the idea of that time you were longing for was a different type of wound than you hear. Sometimes you hear these horrific stories of
physical abuse. Or,
And so I think the idea of when something doesn't happen that we individually need in our own development, then there becomes this vacancy that we end up trying to fill ourselves.
Right. Sure. So. And through all the work that I've done since I've gotten into recovery, I 100% agree with that. And it developed into this never-ending search to fill that. Using started off fun.
Sure.
In high school it was just what we did. I never really got into the typical path, I suppose, of it wasn't that I couldn't do well at school, it was not a priority to me. And looking back on it, I wish I had seen the value in it and taken advantage of it,
Sure.
And sports, I never, the typical sports I never really got into. It was, so I had this group of friends that we were all kind of like-minded. We all like to party, we all like to skateboard and go out and cause trouble on the weekends, and to a degree, I think some of it was normal, normal kid stuff, but it bordered on dangerous. Things that, looking back on it, it's certainly things that I wouldn't want my son to go through. Positions that I wouldn't want my kid to be in. So. And I was always the one who kind of pushed it there. I was the one who kind of always wanted to keep pushing things further. So when high school got over, I graduated barely by the skin of my teeth. And when my friends were going off to high school or to college or getting jobs, or I kind of was still in this spot of searching,
right?
And addiction progressed. It was always more. It was always the next thing, until ultimately I found what I thought I was looking for, which was heroin. And I found myself in a spot where it was like doing more. It was like, okay, well, we'll just get some for the weekend, just for Friday night, and then while we're here, because back then it seems now like it's a huge epidemic, it's a huge problem. Back then it wasn't necessarily that way. This was 2002 or so. So we had to go out of our way to search for it, to get it. We had to drive an hour into the city, and so we would pick up a little bit, and then a little bit more. Well, maybe some for Wednesday during the week, and then that type of thing, and it progressed worse and worse and worse until I was doing it every day.
Do you think? Just thinking about that, what was the because if you had to drive an hour and a half to pick up, in this case, the heroin, did you was the restriction, you guys were restricting yourself, was that because of money, of some way of trying to self-monitor and fear?
Yeah, it was definitely that. Okay. It was like, I knew that I shouldn't be doing this. Okay. Okay. Nobody wakes up in the morning and is like, well, I'm going to do some heroin today. I don't think, anyways. Right. I certainly didn't. Yeah.
Well, what I mean by that, and obviously I'm obviously there's something different. But if I'm going to drive into, let's say Trader Joe's, and I'm going to drive in there, and I know that I'm going to make a monthly trip in there, I'm going to make sure that I get enough that is
right
because I want a stockpile of it or whatever.
So it starts off, with me, it started off self-monitoring. Okay. Like, I'm only going to get this much because I know how dangerous this is, and I know where, I've heard where it can end up, and that. Then it turned into, well, we need to get as much as we can, because eventually you start waking up and you need it to get out of bed. You need it to function. You need it to go to work, and without it, you start getting sick, and it feels terrible. And eventually, we couldn't get enough. It just.
So then you're using just to not feel sick.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, eventually, by the end of the day, eventually you would, be high or enough to fall asleep. But yeah, it was a maintenance thing. After that, from that point on, it was maintenance.
Sure.
It was like I couldn't do anything without it. And I never would have thought as a kid that I would be in this situation. Okay. It got me to do things that I never would have thought that I would do.
Okay. I want to ask you something about going back to childhood. And again, as a counselor, as a person, I realize that there's multiple characters in our story, right? And I don't believe there's any benefit in us identifying someone as the villain, or demonizing them, right? Now we may have individuals in our life who may be that person that pushes us, one way or another, and it's beneficial for us to understand that part of it. But to demonize someone as the bad guy in the story and then think that it just ends there, I think that is that's just bad therapy. That's just bad counseling.
Sure.
And it is just not very productive. And so, but I think there are things that happen in our life where we then make decisions because of events that happen, and they have to do with people. So how many times, if you were going to guess, was that a one-time event that you waited for Dad to come home and he didn't come home, or was there maybe more
it's
other events like that?
There was certainly, there's one in particular where I can put myself there, but I have a large part of memories blocked off.
Okay.
To where prior to my parents getting a divorce and prior to my father leaving, I don't really have too many clear memories. And I mean, I was 7 years old. I mean,
absolutely.
I don't know what's normal and what's not to remember from then, but it was pretty regular. I mean, even after after they got divorced, when he would have visitation or whatever, he'd show up and, there'd be beer cans in the car, and you're not going with him. You're not getting in that car. So there was a few memories, and I use that as an excuse to use for a long time.
Okay. So, and I guess that's kind of, obviously the event that when you wanted Dad to come home so you guys could play or hang out or whatever, and then and that night gets crystallized because you get woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning because they're arguing, and then all the fear of that. So it makes sense that would be a crystallized moment of remembering. I'm wondering, like you just said, that this idea that you used that for a long time to continue using it. I wonder how much that also played in. So our parents, our dads, whoever, they play this role as like authority figures. And if there's this element of rejection, right? Other things are more important or a priority over us. So then does that carry over into the classroom? Does that carry over into playing traditional sports where there'd be these individuals who are these authority figures, coaches, principals, teachers, instructors that were like, no man, I'm out. I'm not putting my energy into this.
Because they could see that?
Or I don't know if they could see it, but could you see that in them, of the risk of them rejecting you?
Sure. So, it wasn't just discipline. It was something that I lacked for sure.
Okay.
That was one of the a major developmental tools that I lacked.
Okay.
My father not being there, and then my mom tried to compensate for everything by not wanting to discipline me, and wanted to be more of a friend than a parent.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, so she saw the pain in your face because of the situation with Dad, and then she didn't want to say no, because then that would be a way of trying to avoid you being disappointed as well.
Right.
I got you. Okay, so it was a combination of different things, and so then the idea of course, in the classroom and in traditional sports teams and things like that, there's going to be someone who's going to be that mentor, that gatekeeper, that person who's going to expect this level of self-discipline, follow-through,
right?
And then, but these alternative lifestyle, meaning like skating,
it was individual, right? Makes a lot of sense.
Sure. But how many hours would you say a week did you practice skating? Back when you were.
Well, it's interesting. I was 16, and I broke my arm pretty bad.
Okay.
So that sidelined me from skateboarding. That's a whole other avenue we can go down. But my friends would wake up on a weekend, on Saturday. My friends would be at my house, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we'd jump on our skateboards and we'd be gone all day, all night, just out skateboarding.
Sure.
I'd have ramps or different obstacles that we could skate at my house, and instead of doing the things that required a discipline from a teacher or a coach, or we would be out doing that.
Sure. So I guess the reason why I bring that up is that you guys were motivated to get up. Maybe not necessarily motivated to get up early to go to school, but motivated to go out and skate. You guys skated. You had physical exercise. You were doing things. You were practicing, tricks. And I don't know much about skateboarding, but it seems like there's a whole lot more falling than there, in the process.
Yeah, there is.
And that just seems to be a normal part of the process. So tell me a little bit about, as a skateboarder, and this is before you had that major break in your arm, but as a skateboarder, this idea that when you're skating, failing is part of the process of becoming better.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about that.
Well, like you just said, a lot of it is falling. A lot of it is that muscle memory. And it actually ties into when I got injured, when I broke my arm, because if you are skateboarding and you do not believe that you can achieve what you're trying to do, you're going to get hurt. You got to have confidence in yourself that you can do. It's all about commitment. It's all about confidence. And when I broke my arm, it took that away because I was doing something that I believed in, and I had confidence that I was going to be able to do.
A trick.
Yeah. And I got some severe consequences. It wasn't a compound fracture, but my arm was surgery, plates, pins, all that stuff. And when I got back on my skateboard, that commitment that I needed, the confidence that I needed to do tricks was gone. And it still hasn't, it never came back. But the life lessons that it can teach is that that you're going to fail. You're not going to be successful every time. You have to practice, and you have to have the discipline to practice. And if you do things correctly, if you do things the right way, you can achieve the landing the trick.
Sure.
So it all kind of ties together with with my break, with my injury, and looking back on it too, that was really my introduction to opiates as well.
Tell us about that. I'm guessing they were prescribed by the doctor.
Yeah, and I remember sitting, this is a really interesting memory, sitting in the emergency room with my arm crooked, and them saying, like, well, do you want pain medication? And I was such an addict before that I didn't want to say yes, because I wanted them to give me more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, tell me. Yeah, I think I understand, but keep going. Yeah,
I felt like if I said yes, I want some,
you were too anxious.
Yeah, they'd go, whoa, So I'm sitting there with my arm crooked, and they go, do you want pain medication? And I was like, no, I'm okay. I was in shock. But ultimately the shock started to wear off, and I was like, yeah, give me some pain medication. I think actually my mom said, give this kid some pain medication, and as soon as they gave me the good stuff, I was like, oh,
so this is what they're talking about.
There it is.
Yeah.
And then, I had surgery, and I was prescribed, strong painkillers for a while, and that really started the cycle. So
for you, in your experience, even though obviously the shock was wearing off and you were in some severe pain because of the break, you experienced how it was affecting your mind and your head as well, of course, as it affects your body.
You mean the drug? When they gave it to me? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you were capturing on
the euphoria.
The euphoria of not just that you were relieved of this physical pain,
right,
which of course was probably part of it, but you also very much attached yourself to the psychological and the dopamine rush that was happening. Because
I knew what it was. I knew that they were going to give me some strong drugs, and yeah, absolutely.
Okay. But now you tasted it.
Right.
And it's hard not to untaste something that you taste.
Right.
Okay.
And it started from there.
Okay. And so then talk a little bit about, as you're healing and recovering from that, how long did that take? How long was did you do rehab? Did you?
A little bit. I was young. Fortunately, when you're 16, your body heals pretty quickly. But I was back on a skateboard within a couple weeks. I had a giant cast on, and even before surgery, I think I was back skateboarding or on a skateboard. I didn't really have too many side effects from that. I broke my arm again, the same arm, in a different spot at my elbow, about a year later. So it was like I spent these 2 years like in a cast and on pain medication, and like but I don't really have too many lasting physical, every now and then I'll bump there's a metal plate in there, I'll bump it and it'll, I'll feel it.
Tingle.
Yeah.
Sure. So what, you said, but you did talk about that it impacted your confidence.
Yes.
When it came to skating, not obviously just being on the board, but to doing certain tricks. So all your friends, it sounds like a big part of your support group and your friends are skaters.
Yeah.
And so, of course, to not be skating is to not be with them.
Right.
They're only going to come over and hang out in your living room for so long, right?
Well, yeah. We were all really, really tight, and they would have been there whether or not we were skateboarding. I was, we were part of the crew or whatever you want to call it, but it was definitely it definitely separated me from the group for a while. And skateboarding has never been the same for me. Now, once I got into addiction and things got really bad, skateboarding just fell off completely. I didn't have time for that. But it was just never the same to have that commitment that it takes to. It's just never been there again.
It almost sounds like there was, with that bad break in the fall that occurred, that there was it took a fierceness, that a boldness that came when you would do certain things, and we call it courage,
right?
But the reality is that it may not be courage until we have the fear of falling,
right?
And then we continue to pursue it anyways until that fear dissipates,
right?
Or at least gets contained,
right?
And so, it's kind of like, oh yeah, the first time I went off the cliff, I wasn't courageous. I didn't know how far down it was,
right? Yeah.
The second time I did, it took a lot of courage to go down the second time.
Yeah.
Right? So, tell me a little bit as we're kind of fast forwarding a little bit
Sure.
about, how do you think, that idea of the essence of what skateboarding can do? This idea of it's an alternative lifestyle, right? Alternative sport, which then can be an alternative lifestyle. It's something that it's not just physical, but it's also psychological. And even has some spiritual components from a standpoint of being one, having a oneness and being in that flow. Talk about how that maybe it did, maybe it didn't help you in recovery and help you now that you do life, that you're now doing life drug and alcohol free. So talk a little bit about that.
I guess skateboarding had taken such a back seat for me for so long that once I got into recovery, it was years before I really got back into skateboarding.
Okay.
There was probably, it wasn't until really, this year was the most that I've been back on a skateboard.
Okay.
So I guess I'm still learning how that will evolve.
Okay.
But I completely agree that there is an aspect to that they can relate.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, having been around, working as an addiction counselor, understanding some of the terms and the concepts of recovery, but understanding the counseling transformation process, is that we can be sober, right? Sober from our drug of choice or mood altering chemicals or activities that lead to that dopamine rush,
right?
We talked about, and we can be clean or that could be arrested. We aren't participating in that activity or that substance anymore, but our thinking may not change.
Right.
And then in that process of learning, so it's like I'm thinking, and I could be wrong about this because I'm not a skateboarder, but the way that you were describing this idea that at some point you have to believe that you're going to land the trick versus that you believe you're going to fall.
Right.
And so you have to believe that you are preparing tonight, this weekend, to be sober versus, well, I don't have any plans, and then you find yourself accidentally relapsing.
Sure.
Or the idea that I'm still hanging on to something, and I haven't surrendered whatever it is because I don't want to address it.
Right.
And there's this element that I guess that in recovery, slipping backwards, right, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go back to opioids, doesn't necessarily mean you have to go back to using, but we can slip back in our thinking. Doesn't necessarily mean all is lost.
Right.
So tell me, and actually maybe it's an opportunity to learn something.
So, one thing when you were just talking, it got me to think of how it relates. And a really interesting aspect of it is when you believe that you're going to land a trick, when you are in that, it is in the moment. Skateboarding is in the moment. It has to be. You have to be in the moment. And, I play music, I play drums too. And to do that, you are in the moment. And that is how it can relate to recovery. Sure. If you are worried about the future, if you are stuck on the past, if you're stuck on things that happened in the past, it all comes back to this idea that it's just for today. Sure. It's right now. Right. That was something that was really important for me to accept and understand. To be successful in recovery was how to learn how to live in the moment and to be okay in the moment, in myself. And that was, that's certainly something that relates to skateboarding.
Yeah. What would be for you? And obviously, skateboarding had not necessarily come to fruition in the first. You've been sober for almost 7 years now, and skateboarding just started in the past year. What were some of those things early on in recovery that helped you move from this life of chasing after this alternate feeling,
right?
And now you're that's not really an option. I mean, it is an option, but you're choosing it to not be. What was some of those initial things that allowed you to start stringing some days together?
So I was thinking about this on the way over here, and there's very few things that I attribute to a miracle. I like to understand things, and I like to believe that everything happened, this happens because of this. And but that what you just talked about is one of the things that I can use that word and feel comfortable.
Which word does that surround?
Miracle.
Okay.
There was so when I was stuck in this cycle of addiction, it was like I'd go to treatment, I'd get, maybe go to a halfway house or come back home, and maybe I could stay clean for a week, 2 weeks, and it was this cycle that I was in. And the last time that I got clean, it wasn't like I knew that there was a different part of the cycle coming.
Sure, right.
It was just, this is where I was in that cycle. And every step of the way, it wasn't like I had this moment where it was like, that's it, I'm done, I'm not going to use anymore, I'm gonna try this recovery. It was just like one little thing after another. And somewhere along the way, the desire to use was taken away. The desire to get high was removed. And I don't know how that happened. I can't say, if I could figure out a way to give that to somebody else, it would be, $1 million idea. But I don't know how that happened. So it's one of the few instances where I have to say that was out of my control. That was a higher power. That was a miracle. And when that happened, when that desire was removed, some other things were happening. I was getting involved in a recovery fellowship. I was, I got a sponsor, and I started working the steps. And when that desire is removed, when the obsession of thinking about getting high 24 hours a day, all day, is taken away, like, surprisingly, you have some time to do other things, you know? Like, it opens up the world of possibilities and dreams, thoughts, hopes, aspirations all come back. And so it's a combination of that being removed, the miracle of not having to obsess about getting high anymore, and then the subsidizing that with all the recovery stuff.
So do you think if there was a way, and of course there's probably no way of ever doing this, but if there was a way that we went back and looked at the videotape of your life, right, at that moment, right, when now, without knowing it, but it was now the beginning of almost 7 years of this part of the journey, but you didn't necessarily know that was going to be the case. It could have just been another 2 or 3 week deal. But if we look back in that videotape, there's probably certain things that we would see. Maybe there was a greater propensity to surrendering, right? We use this word of surrendering because for a moment, instead of going left, which is, you know, letting the thought fester, we go right. And even if it's just for a moment, it's enough to start building on that path of surrendering versus feeling defeated and beat up and shamed, which of course just is going to perpetuate wanting to use, right? Because that was that old feeling. You know, I think of this idea of where sometimes I believe, for me, do I believe that when I turn something over to God, as I understand Him, when I turn something over to God as I understand Him, there's this element that when I truly do that, and I do it without conditions, there's a release. Right. But many times I turn something over to God, and there's expectation. It's like turning over, okay, here's my list, Santa Claus, here's my list of what I want for Christmas, and now there's an expectation of what's going to be sitting underneath the Christmas tree. And I think sometimes when we surrender and want God to remove something from us, right, that we then tie into it an expectation, and then when it pops, the thought of it pops back in, going, it didn't work. Versus when we let go, and then it starts building a little bit more distance, then we notice that we've let go and we're farther away from shore. So some really interesting ideas and things that I thought of when you were talking about that were, I was in a spot where I didn't have expectations because I didn't believe there could be expectations. I didn't know any other expectations. So it was easy for me to not have expectations this time around because it was like I was just doing the normal course. And then you talked about having that going left or going right. Prior to this, I didn't realize that there was a left and right. It was just like I went this way. You went left all the time.
All the time. And one of the big things early on in recovery was that realization that there is another path. That I do have a choice. You know, in the depths of addiction, when I'm there, I don't have a choice. I am powerless. I cannot control my behavior. I cannot control. I've proven it over and over and over again. However, when you take the drugs out and I start to think clearly and I start making better decisions, and I recognize that there is a choice, suddenly I have the power back. Today, I am not powerless over, I do have a choice. In addiction, I'm powerless. In recovery, I have the choice again, and it gives me power back. And realizing that early on was huge for me because I always felt like I never had a choice.
And I'm gonna, and just for the sake that we started off talking about skating, it was this idea that early on, as a young person, you weren't afraid of falling, right? And so you fell and you got back up and you tried again, and you watched somebody else do something and you tried it again, and so you knew you had a choice,
right?
You know, that you could either stay down, which really wasn't an option, or you could just get up and try again.
Right.
And then somewhere along the line, that addiction lied to you and said that you only have a choice to do this, and you have no other choice.
Right. And that was early on when, you know, the first time that I had some bad feelings and, like, you know, maybe some physical dependency things where it was like, well, I have to do it.
Yeah.
You know, like I have to do it to feel better.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a really really important fork right there.
Yeah. And I think because of how addiction works from an end up is that I do something, and that is what causes me to feel this way, and now I'm having withdrawals, and so I'm feeling bad. So then it's this silent shame secret, and that it just continues to lead to going left and going left.
Right.
So as we get ready to kind of wrap up for today,
man, we're just getting started.
I know. So, but let me ask you, just from a combination of, if two parts. One, if there was one thing that you wanted people to know about either the journey of recovery, the journey that you have found yourself in. I mean, I know that you're married now, right?
Yeah.
And have a child.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a whole lot different place than, you know, when you were 24, 25, right?
Yeah.
And what would be one thing that you would want people to know that may be struggling, or maybe a significant other, someone who's struggling?
So, just that there's hope. I came into recovery completely hopeless. A lot of people had written me off, and a lot of people had given up, and for good reason. For a long time, I was doing a lot of bad things. But I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, that when I got into recovery and the obsession was taken away, it opened up the door for all the hopes and dreams that I had as a child to come back. And I've learned some lessons in recovery that tie into some of the things we talked about, like not expecting results, maybe making some plans, and if I make plans for something and I do the best that I can, the results that come out of it are generally good. And that has led me down the path to achieving things that I had given up on, and doing things that I never, being in positions that I never thought that I would be in. Sitting here with you today, you know, if you would have told me 8 years ago that somebody would want me to hear my story, I would not have believed you. And so an addict can recover. Anybody can stop using, lose the desire to use, and find a new way to live.
Sure.
100% of the time. That is possible for anybody.
Yeah.
And if it can happen for me, I truly believe that it can happen for anybody else.
Sure.
And I want to help people get there before it's too late. You know, it truly is an epidemic now. There's people dying every day.
Yeah. Well, as long as someone's breathing, right?
Sure.
There's that possibility, that hope that they can surrender, and let go, and recognize that there is another path, that they can go down that to the right and go that journey instead of going to the left. You know, and I guess I want to wrap up with this piece. When I remember when you talked to me about the event back in early January, and you said, well, if it helps just one person, if just one person shows up,
right?
And there was an element that day that, even though I know you were nervous and you were concerned about it, there was an element going back to the whole skateboarding, is that there was still going to be this confidence that you were going to land this, that you knew that certain people were going to be there,
right?
Because you had done the hard work to ensure that they were going to be there. Now, how many people were going to be there along with that, we didn't know what that was going to be like. But I think it's kind of like, if you're doing that work and you're disciplining yourself, and even though there's setbacks, you get up and you learn from them. I think that's some of the lessons that you can learn from music, from art, from skateboarding, and then have a platform like you're looking for, to be able to bring that to the Rockford area on a more consistent basis. The name of the organization, do you have a name for the organization?
The organization that I'm working with to put that event? Yeah, it was the Warp Core organization. It was the Woodstock Aggressive Riders Park was the Woodstock Skate Park.
Okay.
They put these events on, and I got involved and brought one to Rockford.
Okay.
Talking about the gifts that I've gotten from recovery, being able to be a good husband and a father. My son is 6, and he hopefully doesn't have to go through the things that I went through.
Sure.
And had things happen the way that if I would have had my son a year earlier, I'm not sure things would have worked out the way that they did. And through being a father, I've gotten and in recovery, I've gotten some perspective on what my father went through, and found some peace with where he was and what he did and the decisions that he made, because it could have been me.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the amazing things is that, like you just spoke, when we can have empathy, and have a clue of what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, then we can have some grace and maybe some kindness toward somebody.
Right.
And but it's hard sometimes, unless we can be open to that empathy of walking in someone else's shoes. It's hard sometimes to let go and have that kindness. Well, we need to wrap up for today.
Sure. Yeah.
I really appreciate you being here and being on the journey. If someone wanted to know more about Warp and about any events that you have coming up, what's the best way for them?
So the Warp Core has a Facebook page and a website, warpcore.org, and we are working on getting some other events together here in the Rockford area.
Okay.
Memorial Day, there's a skateboarding event coming up that we're planning right now. So there's some more things.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Well, again, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And sharing your story. All right.
Absolutely.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.